to the next story here about Barack Obama. So believe it or not, Barack Obama is back in the news again because he has officially released a statement in reference to Israel and Palestine. I don't know why he feels like he keeps needing to release these statements just because he's not president anymore. He's not a politician. But apparently, for some reason, Barack Obama feels that people care what he thinks, right? So let's go ahead and show this clip here. Shout out to Case Study QB for this, and then we're going to get into that actual statement from Barack Obama.
Barack Obama weighing in on the ongoing Israel-Hamas war and the Mideast crisis. He states in a new essay that the Israeli government's decision to cut off food and water to a captive civilian population threatens to worsen the crisis and harden Palestinian attitudes for generations. He talks about that eroding global support for Israel and his concerns that it could undermine the long-term efforts, which include those in his administration, to achieve peace and stability. Obama also writes in this same essay that Israel has a right to defend its citizens against wanton violence, and he notes that he supports President Biden's call for the United States to support our longtime ally in going after Hamas, dismantling its military capabilities, and facilitating the safe return of those hostages. We report on some of that tonight. Also, Obama mentioning it's time to make sure all actively oppose anti-Semitism and reject efforts that he calls, quote, minimizing the terrible tragedy that the Israeli people have just endured.
This part right here, because we'll get into the actual statement where he says actively opposing anti-Semitism, rejecting efforts to minimize the terrible tragedy that the Israeli people have just endured, rejecting efforts to minimize. This is essentially Barack Obama calling for forms of censorship, because I saw a video, it's floating around on Twitter. I'm not going to play it on here because I don't think YouTube will like that. But there are actually Israeli content creators on Instagram and on TikTok, and they've been making videos painting their faces like Palestinian people. They've been mocking Palestinian people in the utmost, like the worst way. The worst way. They've even made fun of the children. It's bad. That's why I said I'm not going to play it on here. But I would like to see people like Barack Obama call that out as well. Now, I didn't finish that. Sorry. Let me let this finish and I'll get to the statement.
Just endured. That is Barack Obama weighing in, as many people around the world have. He did it in his characteristic style. You can search Obama Medium, where that full essay is, as he discusses the foreign policy issues, support for the Biden administration's approach, and as you heard there, his attempt to wrestle with many of the complex issues in this war.
Okay. Let's get to the statement from Obama. Because what was interesting about this is that, number one, I didn't know Obama wrote for Medium, random. But number two, he tries to both side this a bit. Now, some of the things that he said you might be surprised by, but make no mistake, he's still on the side of Israel. Like, he's not stupid. He knows like what he needs to do in order to maintain the spot that he has. So let's get into this. Thoughts on Israel and Gaza from Barack Obama. Yep, he's on Medium, folks. It's been 17 days since Hamas launched its horrific attack against Israel, killing over 1,400 Israeli citizens, including defenseless women, children, and the elderly. In the aftermath of such unspeakable brutality, the U.S. government and the American people have shared in the grief of families, prayed for the return of loved ones, and rightly declared solidarity with the Israeli people. So let me highlight this here. No. Because if you pay attention to the protests, Barack Obama, which I'm pretty sure he has, the majority of the people, the world, actually stands with the Palestinian people and their plight. He goes on to say, as I stated in an earlier post, Israel has a right to defend its citizens against such wanton violence. And I fully support President Biden's call for the U.S. to support our longtime ally in going after Hamas, dismantling its military capabilities, and facilitating the safe return of hundreds of hostages to their families. So what they're essentially saying here, when they continue to repeat this phrase, that it has a right to defend itself, you notice you never hear them say that Gaza has a right to defend itself, that the West Bank has a right to defend itself, that the Palestinian people have a right to defend themselves. You never hear them say that. And when they made the statement that they give unwavering support to the state of Israel, what that means is that it gives Israel a pass to do whatever they want to the Palestinian people and others. We'll get into that in a second. So pay attention to that. Like, you never hear them say it the other way around. So essentially what that means is, how are you defending yourself? First of all, let's put it this way. When there was the attack from Hamas and Israel responded, they could say that was Israel defending itself. But Israel has still been attacking. How are you still defending yourself if you're still just, especially if you're going after civilians? People say, well, they're not. They hit the West Bank. Israel bombed the West Bank. Hamas is in Gaza. Israel has been bombing Syria and Lebanon. Hamas isn't there. So how are you defending yourself now? So just keep that in mind. Now, here's where he switches up. He tries to do the other side. But even as we support Israel, we should also be clear that how Israel prosecutes this fight against Hamas matters. In particular, it matters, as President Biden has repeatedly emphasized, that Israel's military strategy abides by international law, including those laws that seek to avoid, to every extent possible, the death or suffering of civilian populations. Upholding these values is important for its own sake, because it is morally just and reflects our belief in the inherent value of every human life. Upholding these values is also vital for building alliances and shaping international opinion, all of which are critical for Israel's long-term security. So here he is trying to both sides it, and I want to be very clear. This piece where he brings up the suffering of civilian populations, what's happening to the Palestinian people, I honestly believe that had it not been for the protests happening all across the world, and these protests are increasing, by the way, I don't even think he would have acknowledged that. This is where outside organizing and pressure on the outside can actually push people to acknowledge what's going on. Now, Barack Obama is not a political official anymore, but it can push people to have to. Before those protests were happening, mainstream media didn't say anything positive about the Palestinian people. They weren't willing to acknowledge the open air prison. They didn't really want to talk about what was happening to those people before October 7th. They didn't want to go into any of that. Now you see them, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, having to have these discussions about why they're in this situation to begin with in the first place. And I don't think that would have happened had it not been for the public pressure pushing back on this idea that the Palestinian people are just nothing, and that they haven't been struggling, and that they haven't had to suffer, and that they haven't been occupied. So this is where outside pressure actually does work. This is an enormously difficult task. War is always tragic, and even the most carefully planned military operations often put civilians at risk. As President Biden noted during his recent visit to Israel, America itself has at times fallen short of our higher values when engaged in war. And after the aftermath of September 11, the U.S. government wasn't interested in heeding the advice of even our allies when it came to the steps we took to protect ourselves against al-Qaeda. Now, after systemic massacre of Israeli citizens, a massacre that evokes some of the darkest memories of persecution against the Jewish people, it's understandable that many Israelis have demanded that their government do whatever it takes to root out Hamas and make sure such attacks never happen again. Moreover, Hamas military operations are deeply embedded within Gaza, and its leadership seems to intentionally hide among civilians, thereby endangering the very people they claim to represent. I would say refusing to give people in Gaza water is endangering the people. I would say like cutting off electricity so that they can't operate in the hospitals is endangering the people. I would say that giving people in Gaza dirty water is endangering the people. So the Palestinian people are essentially living in ghettos that they're not allowed to leave. Let's continue. Still, the world is watching closely as events in the region unfold, and any Israeli military strategy that ignores the human cost could ultimately backfire. Already, thousands of Palestinians have been killed in the bombing of Gaza, many of them children. So we have to remember again, the majority of the population in Gaza are kids. So just keep that in mind. Hundreds of thousands have been forced from their homes. Let me highlight this. We'll come back to it. The Israeli government's decision to cut off food, water, and electricity to a captive civilian population threatens not only to worsen a growing humanitarian crisis, it could further harden Palestinian attitudes for generations, erode global support for Israel, and play into the hands of Israel's enemies and undermine long-term efforts to achieve peace and stability in the region. Let's go to the highlighted text and then I'll come back to what he said there at the end. He said, hundreds of thousands have been forced from their homes. Hundreds of thousands were forced from their homes decades ago. Palestinians that lived in Jerusalem, Palestinians that lived outside of the fence of Gaza and the West Bank, they were forced from their homes decades ago, not just recently after October 7th. Anyone talking about this crisis who is not willing to discuss the history and how we got here, you need to give a side eye. But what is interesting is the fact that Obama even pointed out the humanitarian crisis, which I am surprised that he mentioned that. This piece here towards the end, it could further harden Palestinian attitudes for generations, erode global support for Israel, play into the hands of Israel's enemies, and undermine long-term efforts to achieve peace and stability in the region. This is one of the things that people have pointed out, is that this is not good for Netanyahu. Because other countries, and we're going to get into Jordan in just a second, other countries are watching this, and it can make some of them not want to support Israel financially anymore in the future. Because they're watching what's happening to the Palestinian people. So this is the warning that Barack Obama is giving, that Israel could lose some of its allies. So again, like I said, this is not a good look for Netanyahu. Also, some of the racist statements that Netanyahu has made recently, where he said Israel is the children of the light and the Palestinian people are the children of the dark. That's some racist shit. Let's just keep it real. And this piece right here, it is therefore important that those of us supporting Israel in this time encourage a strategy that can incapacitate Hamas while minimizing further civilian casualties. Minimizing it. Israel's recent shift to allow relief trucks into Gaza, prompted in part by the Biden administration's behind-the-scene diplomacy, is an encouraging step. But we need to continue to lead the international community in accelerating critical aid and supplies to an increasingly desperate Gaza population. So again, to that point, you need to explain why they're desperate, because they're not desperate due to October 7th. They were already desperate and in that position before then. And while the prospects of future peace may seem more distant than ever, we should call on all of the key actors in the region to engage with those Palestinian leaders and organizations that recognize Israel's right to exist, to begin articulating a viable pathway for Palestinians to achieve their legitimate aspirations for self-determination, because that is the best and perhaps the only way to achieve the lasting peace and security most Israeli and Palestinian families yearn for. So this piece right here is why people are saying, did Obama really just say that? This piece right here. To begin articulating a viable pathway for Palestinians to achieve their legitimate aspirations for self-determination. Now, some people read this and they thought, oh, is he calling for a push for the two-state solution? I've told you guys before, I don't see how that could work now because there's just too many settlements. But I am very surprised that he said we need to articulate a viable pathway for Palestinians to achieve the legitimate aspirations of self-determination. Now, why do I think he's saying this? Why this is happening? Because for one, you got to remember, Barack Obama has kids that are in college. No, I think his kids are still in college. At least one of them is still in college. How do most college students feel about this issue? Most of the students, they don't like what Israel's doing. Most of the students are standing with the Palestinian people and their struggle and their plight. And then there's the protests that are happening internationally. The masses of people coming out in the streets. In his former home of Chicago, Chicago had one of the largest protests. You can't ignore it. And the majority, especially the younger people, they don't like it, bruh. They don't like it. So he had to respond in a way that tells people that he realizes that the Palestinian people need self-determination. Now, he still tries to both sides it. He's still, obviously still going to say, we got to support Israel and all that kind of stuff. He knows that. If he went against it, Barack Obama would fall off the social ladder so damn fast. That would be the end of Barack. You wouldn't hear nothing about him again. But why is this important? Why is this important that we address this issue? Because I want to show you this isn't just about Palestine. Now, the Queen of Jordan, her name is Rania. She actually had an interview recently on CNN. She is speaking out about what's happening to the Palestinian people. And I want you to hear this. Now, this is Christine that's hosting this interview. Listen to this.
Jordan is home to 40% of the total registered Palestinian refugees in the Middle East, according to the UN. That is simply a huge number, especially for a small country. Jordan's Queen Rania is herself of Palestinian descent, and she's joining me now for a world exclusive from Amman, the capital. Queen Rania, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Christian.
Can I ask you first, as an Arab, as a Palestinian, as a human being, a mother, how you're feeling ever since October 7th?
Well, look, Christian, I cannot begin to describe to you the depth of the grief, the pain, and the shock that we are feeling here in Jordan. All of us are united in this grief, regardless of our origin. We are just can't believe the images that we're seeing every single day coming out of Gaza. We're going to bed seeing those images and waking up to them. I don't know how to, as a mom, we've seen Palestinian mothers who've had to write the names of their children on their hands because the chances of them being shelled to death, of their bodies turning into corpses, are so high. I just want to remind the world that Palestinian mothers love their children just as much as any other mother in the world. And for them to have to go through this is just unbelievable. And equally, I think the people all around the Middle East, including in Jordan, we are just shocked and disappointed by the world's reaction to this catastrophe that is unfolding. In the last couple of weeks, we have seen a glaring double standard in the world. When October 7th happened, the world immediately and unequivocally stood by Israel and its right to defend itself and condemned the attacks that happened. But what we're seeing the last couple of weeks, we're seeing silence in the world. Countries have stopped at just expressing concern or acknowledging the casualties, but always with a preface of declaration of support for Israel. And, are we being told that it is wrong to kill an entire family at gunpoint, but it's okay to shell them to death? I mean, there is a glaring double standard here, and it is just shocking to the Arab world. This is the first time in modern history that there is such human suffering, and the world is not even calling for a ceasefire. So the silence is deafening, and to many in our region, it makes the Western world complicit, through their support and through the cover that they give Israel, that it is just its right to defend itself. Many in the Arab world are looking at the Western world as not just tolerating this, but as aiding and abetting it. And this is just horrendous, and it's deeply, deeply disappointing to all of us.
And I want to just chime in about something she said there about how, people in her country are looking at like the Western world. So let's just go with the United States here, right? Because we are funding the state of Israel. Here's the thing. This is part of the reason why some people in other countries have so much disdain for the United States. It doesn't look good. Like when people think about the suffering, what's happening to the people in Palestine, they're going to think about, oh, yeah, the U.S., of course, the U.S. is funding it. If you go to places like Yemen or Syria, you can see it as well. Oh, sure, of course, the U.S. was funding it. And this can actually make people in countries like Jordan and Egypt, and honestly, I'm going to slide in Saudi Arabia too, because Saudi Arabia is already a little on shaky ground. Like Saudi Arabia is kind of like that. Saudi Arabia is the friend that has one foot out the door. So it's like Saudi Arabia was like best friends with the United States, and they used to be besties and hang out every Friday, movie night, all that jazz, go to the bar, get lit, all that kind of stuff. But then one day, Saudi Arabia met another friend, and that friend was China. And China said, hey, want to come over and hang out at my house? We got a free keg. And Saudi Arabia decided to come on over and party with China. And honestly, they were like, you know what? China treat me all right. They treat me all right. And then China introduced Saudi Arabia to some of their other friends that were part of BRICS. And Saudi Arabia went to the club and clubbed with BRICS, and they was just hanging out and having a good time. And Saudi Arabia was like, you know what? The United States was wrong. China and the rest of these peeps are actually pretty cool. Now, the U.S. is sitting at home on a Friday night, and the U.S. is trying to figure out how come Saudi Arabia is not responding to my text messages. I used to text them, and Saudi used to respond on the quick and say, yeah, I'll meet you there. It's been 24 hours, and they haven't responded to my text. What's going on, Saudi Arabia? Why are you not responding to me? So then the U.S. starts to get a little bit stalkerish. It becomes that stalker friend that starts texting you every hour on the hours like, I know you see this message. Damn you, Saudi Arabia. You better answer me. I know you see this. Why haven't you spoken to me in 2 days? Do I need to come by your house? And Saudi Arabia gets freaked out. And Saudi Arabia wants to respond. But at the same time, Saudi Arabia is like, well, it's probably not a good idea for me to respond now because I've been invited to join BRICS. So Saudi Arabia doesn't get the opportunity to tell the U.S. that, but the U.S. finds out about it because the U.S. sees it on the news and is like, ain't that a bitch? That's why Saudi Arabia ain't been talking to me. That's why they missed movie night. That's why they ain't been clubbing with me. They've been hanging out with them BRICS people. But see, the U.S. got to keep it cool because the U.S. still needs oil from Saudi Arabia. So the U.S. has to take a step back and be like, damn, I still need that motherfucker for oil. So the U.S. picks up the phone and leaves a message. Sorry, I reacted the way that I did. I was going through some things. But I just want to keep the peace. I just wanted you to know I missed you. That's all. I hope we still cool. So Saudi Arabia doesn't call the US back, but sends a text message that says, okay. That's where we are right now with Saudi Arabia. Whenever you get that K from somebody after you laid out this whole speech, you on shaky ground. So inserting Saudi Arabia into this as well, you really need to think. Saudi Arabia giving the US a side eye right now because Saudi Arabia is hanging out with the BRICS peeps. And Saudi Arabia also knows that US still needs them for that oil. So just keep that in mind at who is looking at us and in what kind of way.
Queen Rania, I'm going to ask you more about this and go deeper into this, into your feelings about this. But first, I want to ask you, the Israelis are shocked to their core, the grief, what happened to them has never happened in that way since the Holocaust. And they are shaken to their core, as I said, and the grief. I just want to get from you what you felt on October 7th.
Well, of course, I was shocked. And, Jordan has made his position very clear. We condemn the killing of any civilian, whether Palestinian or Israeli. That is Jordan's ethical and moral position. And it's also the position of Islam. Islam condemns the killing of civilians. As my husband mentioned recently, the Pact of Omar, which was issued on the gates of Jerusalem 15 centuries ago, that's 1,000 years before the Geneva Conventions, orders Muslims not to kill a woman, child, or elderly person, and not to destroy a tree or hurt a priest. And so this is what we believe are the rules of engagement at time of war, but they need to apply to everybody. So yes, there was the shock and there is the condemnation, but why isn't there equal condemnation to what is happening now? I just want to emphasize that what happened on this conflict did not begin on October 7th, although it has been being portrayed as that. Most networks are covering the story under the title of Israel at War. But for many Palestinians on the other side of the separation wall, on the other side of the barbed wire, war has never left. This is a 75-year-old story, a story of overwhelming death and displacement to the Palestinian people. It is a story of an occupation under an apartheid regime that occupies land, that demolishes houses, confiscates land, military incursions, night raids. The context of a nuclear-armed regional superpower that occupies, oppresses, and commits daily documented crimes against Palestinians is missing from the narrative.
Queen Rania,
for too long, Palestinians' life.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I want to ask you a specific question because you're using a lot of words which.
Oh, no, you're using too many words. It's wrecking my brain. You're saying too much. You're saying too much. It hurts. Stop. But the point I wanted you to hear there that the Queen of Jordan made, we need to stop talking about this in reference to what happened on October 7th as if that is the beginning of this. That's not the beginning of this. And I think a lot of us that have been paying attention to what's happening to the Palestinian people, we've known about that for a long time. But you see how mainstream media is discussing it. Now I want to show you why I wanted you to hear from the Queen of Jordan. Not just the fact that she's Palestinian, but I told you before, this is not just about Palestine. There is a greater plan here that we've discussed earlier on the JB and Sabby show on RBN earlier. They want to expand. I want to show you the map. Expansionism or the greater Israel. So this has already been discussed before. This is not like a secret thing or none of that. You can Google it and easily find this. And I want you to look at this map. How can I make it so that the map just... Oh, I guess I can't do it that way. Will they let me do it that way? Yeah. There we go. Look at this map. Actually, I made that worse. I'm sorry, guys. Eric had it right the first time. Okay, look at this map. So the dotted line here says UN recognized national borders. So you can see here's Lebanon, Syria. There's Palestine, right? Then we get into Jordan, and there's Egypt. Remember, I told you Egypt is right next to Palestine. The goal is not just to remain in Palestine. The goal is to expand into the southern part of Lebanon, into part of Syria, part of Jordan, and Egypt. And if you go down, notice there's even a little tip of Saudi Arabia, and there's other pictures that show a want to go further than that in reference to Saudi Arabia as well. So what I'm saying is this: Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, you guys are targets too. It's not just Palestine. That's why I wanted you to hear from the Queen of Jordan. Like, this is something to pay close attention to. Again, I told you Israel is bombing Lebanon. Israel is bombing Syria. Hamas isn't in those countries. They want to take over. See, look, they want to do this, get Lebanon and Syria too. And into Egypt. So for the people who tell me, well, Egypt, just open your door and let the Palestinians come in. First of all, Egypt said they don't even have the space. But again, would that actually solve it? If the goal is to expand into Egypt too? See, this is why, I think there was another one here I was going to show. Or did I show it? Oh, no, I didn't show that. This part up here. This is why it says the Jewish state was founded on the basis of ancient biblical map. And to this date, the Jewish state still refuses to declare its borders in favor of future expansion. There is nothing like this biblical map to send shivers among Arabs and Muslims, since its borders span the occupied West Bank, including occupied East Jerusalem, occupied Gaza Strip, southern Lebanon, the western parts of Jordan, and the southern Syria, including the occupied Golan Heights. So this is what I've been trying to tell everybody. This is the ultimate goal. And I talked about this before in reference to colonialism. Like, when you colonize a place, it's not like you say, I'm just going to colonize just this northeastern part of North America. No, they spread. The goal is to acquire as much land as possible for your people. And that is the goal. This is why I continue to say, and I've said this before, there were multiple opportunities to reach an agreement way before October 7th. 2002, the Arab Peace Initiative. That was a proposal to give the Palestinians part of the land and give the Israelis part of the land. Israel rejected it. So what they tell you? They don't want no agreement. They want all the land. And we have politicians supporting apartheid. You go to some of the comments. We got to wake up, guys. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. I know, not out here talking about 9/11 H2O crisis. Thank you, Barack Obama. We got money for war, but can't feed the poor. That's right. Tupac quote there. Thank you, Eric, for the super chat. Keep in mind that this is the same monster in Barack Obama that destroyed Libya, even though Muammar Gaddafi had love for President Obama. But remember, they came after Gaddafi because Gaddafi, again, wanted to make Africa independent from the West. He didn't want Africa to have to depend on the West anymore. Thank you for the super chat, Janice. Notice also they never mentioned the 5,000 Palestinians Israel had imprisoned without charge before the 7th, aka holding them hostage. Well said. Thank you, Roger. Sabby, are you doing projection? Who stood you up? No one stood me up. That's funny. We can talk about that on call-in, though. Thank you, Julie O. Jocko Willink, or Willink? Jocko Willink was talking about how Israel says Hamas is in Sorry, there's something on my computer screen. I don't know what that is, but it's there. Oh, well, you guys can't see it. Jocko Willink was talking about how Israel says Hamas is in the tunnels and underground, so them bombing buildings isn't taking out Hamas. Great point by a very respected veteran and former SEAL. Thank you, Julio.